This is a production of Cornell University.
Julie Schumacher got her MFA here in 1986. She currently directs the creative writing program at the University of Minnesota and is the author of 9 books, all of them fiction, except for her latest book, which is a graphic book, actually identified as a coloring and activity book called Doodling for Academics. It is a coloring book. I've already colored it, half of it. Saving the half for the next snowstorm. The next time Cornell calls a snow day by accident. A 10th book, the Shakespeare Requirement, is due out from Doubleday in August. Her first novel, The Body is Water, was an American Library Association Notable Book of the Year and a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award. Her most recent novel, that's already out, Dear Committee Members, was a national bestseller and winner of the 2015 Thurber Prize for American Humor. And if you haven't heard of that prize, it's previously been won by David Sedaris, Andy Borowitz, Christopher Buckley, Ian Fraser, and Jon Stewart. Her essays and short stories have appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The Chronicle for Higher Education, Best American Short Stories, and prize stories, the O. Henry Collection. When I first met Julie Schumacher, and she was an MFA student, she often told us stories about her father, Fred, who had 5 daughters and no sons. He liked to tell his daughters stories when he was saying goodnight to them. This is like a portrait of the artist as the daughter of a sonless man. He liked to tell his daughters stories when he was saying goodnight to them. He made the stories up as he went along, and he did not make up fairy tales with happy endings. He made up horror stories, or stories about adventures gone wrong, such as the story of a man lost at sea who had to save his own life by removing his appendix. There was a companion piece to that, I believe, about a man lost at sea who had to remove his own tonsils. These were cliffhanger stories guaranteed to keep children awake at night. Later, when the girls were older, Fred, that's her father's name, Fred, discovered that the one bathroom in the house was often occupied by only one daughter, while the other 4 daughters stood in line in the hallway. He attempted to solve the problem in his manly way by remodeling the bathroom so that it had 2 showers, 3 sinks, and 2 toilets. Unlike Fred, you will not be surprised that the line in the hallway did not go away. I used to ask Julie whether I could have Fred for my own writing. She'll confirm this because he didn't seem to be making an appearance in her fiction. She said no. Many of us wanted Fred at that time, and we're really literally about to plagiarize, oral storytelling. But Fred finally appeared in a magnificent story. Of course, his spirit appeared. It's not her autobiography, but An Explanation for Chaos, which is the title story of a truly wonderful short story collection. He appeared many times later. I think he's still going. He's eccentric, sometimes cranky, often tender, often unwittingly funny, often wittily funny. He's appeared, I think, even recently, most recently, as Professor Ficker. I don't know if Julie would agree with this, in Dear Committee Members. Professor Ficker gives us an entire novel comprised only of his letters of recommendation for students and colleagues and ex-wives and ex-lovers whom he doesn't often like. The English majors, whom he does mostly like, are applying for post-graduation jobs at places such as liquor stores and paintball emporiums. Ficker believes that he is underestimated by his department, his university, and by the literary world. He's self-pitying and indignant, but often his indignation is just right. He's right to complain when the office he is working in is showered with toxic dust and fumes, while the offices upstairs are being remodeled and upgraded. The faculty upstairs, the social scientists and the economists, that is, are evacuated to protect their health and limbs, while all of the English professors are left behind. Professor Ficker is a funny letter writer whose entire life history is spilled out in his letters. At first, you laugh at him, then you laugh with him, and then you begin to like him and sympathize with him. Because although Julie Schumacher is a witty writer and an eviscerating writer, she's also someone who can break your heart, and she can frighten you in her fiction. But above all, she writes with a very human and tender vision and forgiving look at the other members of her species. Please welcome Julie Schumacher.
Now I'm going to think about, I am always writing about my father. I should go back to my therapist is what I should do. Does this sound okay? Is it buzzing or does it sound funny? No. Buzzing a little, but not too bad. Maybe it's better farther away. Yell if you can't hear me. Let's see. I want to first put that down. Thank Stephanie, who was my advisor at Cornell, the world's best advisor, and Helena Veramontes and Lynn Lucas for the invitation and organizing the visit, and Kevin Attell, I'm getting to visit his class tomorrow. And, you know, being at Cornell was just a great part of my life. I was telling a grad student today that an MFA program is, in a way, a sort of parenthesis around your life. I was working as a secretary. I was trying to get a glamorous editing job in New York, and instead was a typist on a gynecology journal. It was not all that thrilling. And all of a sudden, miraculously, I think I had one story at the time, and I sent it in, and I got in. I thought, my God, I've just finagled them into letting me in here. And Stephanie and Michael Cook and other faculty gave me space to live a creative life for 4 years. And I got to meet people like Paul Cody and Liz Holmes and Melissa Bank, who I attended Cornell with in the MFA program, and it was a dream. So thanks for having me read here. I'm going to read some bits from Dear Committee Members, which, as Stephanie said, is all written in letters, so it excerpts into tiny pieces. And then I'll read just a couple pages of the new novel, The Shakespeare Requirement, which comes out in August. That one is a bit of a continuation of Dear Committee Members. Got the same father-like weird and crabby man in it. So this is toward the beginning of Dear Committee Members. September 4, 2009, Theodore Botti, Chair, Department of English. Dear Ted, your memo of August 30 requests that we on the English faculty recommend some luckless colleague for the position of Director of Graduate Studies. You may have been surprised to find this position vacant upon your assumption of the chairship last month. If so, trust me, you will find many such surprises here. A quick aside, Ted. God knows what enticements were employed during the heat of summer to persuade you, a sociologist, to accept the position of chair in a department not your own, an academic unit whose reputation for eccentricity and discord has inspired the upper echelon to punish us by withholding favors as if from a 6-year-old at a birthday party. Perhaps, as the subject of a sociological study, you'll find the problem of our dwindling status intriguing. To the matter at hand. Although English has traditionally been a large-ish department, there are now very few viable candidates capable of assuming the mantle of Director of Grad Studies. In fact, if I were a betting man, I would wager that only 10% of the English instruction list will answer your call for nominations. Why? First, because more than a third of our faculty now consists of temporary adjunct instructors who creep into the building under cover of darkness to teach their graveyard shifts of freshman comp. They are not eligible to vote or to serve. Second, because the remaining 2/3 of the faculty, bearing the scars of disenfranchisement and long-term abuse, are busy tending to personal grudges, like scraps of carrion on which they gnaw in the gloom of their offices. Long story short, your options aren't pretty. After subtracting the names of those who are on leave or close to retirement and those already serving in the killing fields of administration, you will probably be forced to choose between Franklin Cantrell, no, spend 5 consecutive minutes with him and you will understand why. Jennifer Brown Wilson, a whipping girl for the theory faction, already terrorized, she will decline. Albert Tyne, under no circumstances should you enter Tyne's office without several days' warning, more on this later. Donna Lovejoy, poor overworked creature, I hereby nominate her, anonymously please, with this letter and me. I make myself unpleasant enough to be safe from nomination. Ted, in your memo, you referred briefly also to the need for faculty forbearance during what we were initially told would be the remodeling of the second floor for the benefit of our colleagues in the economics department. I'm not sure that you noticed, but the econ faculty were, in early August, evacuated from the building as if they had been notified, sotto voce, of an oncoming plague. Not so the faculty in English. With the exception of a few individuals, both fleet of foot and quick-witted enough to claim the status as asthmatics, we have been left behind, almost biblically, expected to begin our classes and to meet with students while bulldozers snarl at the door. Yesterday afternoon, during my multicultural American literature class, I watched a wrecking ball swinging like a hypnotist's watch just past the window. While I am relieved to know that the economists, such delicate creatures, have been safely installed in a wing of the new geology building where their physical comfort and aesthetic needs can be addressed, those of us who remain as castaways here in Willard Hall risk not only deafness, but mutation. As of last week, we've been instructed to keep our windows tightly closed due to particulate matter, but my office window, here's the amusing part, Ted, no longer shuts. One theory here, the deanery is annoyed with our requests for parity and, weary of waiting for us to retire, has decided to kill us. Let the academic year begin. Cordially and with a hearty welcome to the Madhouse, Jay. September 9, 2009. Mary Alice Ingersoll, manager, Wexler Foods, Inc., 65409 Capitol Drive, Maplewood, Minnesota, 55109. Dear Ms. Ingersoll, this letter is intended to bolster the application to Wexler Foods of my former student, John Lazinski, who completed the junior-senior creative writing workshop 3 months ago. Mr. Lazinski received a final grade of B, primarily on the basis of an 11-page short story about an inebriated man who tumbles into a cave and surfaces from an alcoholic stupor to find that a tentacled monster, a sort of fanged and copiously salivating octopus, if memory serves, is gnawing through the flesh of his lower legs, the monster spittle burbling ever closer to the victim's groin. Although chaotic and improbable even within the fantasy horror genre, the story was solidly constructed. Dialogue consisted primarily of agonized groans and screaming. The chronology was relentlessly clear. Mr. Lazinski attended class faithfully, arriving on time, and rarely succumbed to the undergraduate impulse to check his cell phone for messages or relentlessly zip and unzip his backpack in the final moments of class. Whether punctuality and an enthusiasm for flesh-eating cephalopods are the main attributes of the ideal Wexler employee, I have no idea. But Mr. Lazinski is an affable young man, reliable in his habits, and reasonably bright. You might want to start him off in produce rather than seafood or meats. Whimsically yours, Jason T. Ficker, Payne. He writes a number of letters to his ex-wife, who conveniently works at the law school. September 22, 2009. Payne University Law School admissions, care of Janet Mathias, AKA Janet Mathias Ficker, 17 Pittlinger Hall. Dear admissions committee members and Janet, This letter recommends Melanie de Rueda for admission to the law school on the well-heeled side of this campus. I have known Ms. de Rueda for 11 minutes. 10 of these were spent in a fruitless attempt to explain to her that I write letters of recommendation only for students who have signed up for and completed one of my classes. This young woman is certainly tenacious, if that's what you're looking for. A transfer student, she appears to be suffering under the delusion that a recommendation from any random faculty member within our institution will be the key to her application's success. Janet, I know your committees aren't reading these blasted letters. Under the influence of our final martini in August, you told me as much. I wish I had an ex-wife like you at every department. Over in the fellowship office, the formerly benevolent Carol continues to maintain an icy distance. I should have thought her decision to quit our relationship would be a cheerful burst of self-esteem. She apparently views the end of our 3 years together in a different light. Ms. de Rueda claims to be sending her transcripts and LSAT scores to you at the end of this week. God help you. This is your shot across the bow, should you admit her. Still affectionately, your one-time husband, Jay. November 24, 2009. Confidential reference for Cynthia Goldberg. Please complete the following to the best of your knowledge. 1. How long and in what capacity have you known the applicant? Greetings, committee members. I have known Ms. Goldberg for almost 3 years. She was my student in 2 undergraduate classes, the 20th Century American Survey, which begins with 2. Give a brief description of the applicant's aptitude and/or past performance. Ms. Goldberg received a B+ in the chaotic welter of the survey, an introductory course designed by this university to function as part academic lecture, part flash mob, because of the unrestricted and steadily rising numbers of enrolled students, 10% of whom failed due to ennui or inebriation. Class did meet at 8 a.m., and subsequently faded back into the larger, undifferentiated ooze of the campus. In the short story class, she received a B-, perhaps unfairly. The size of the group, 3. Do you know of any reasons why the applicant should not be given responsibility as stated on the list of qualifications above? First, I'm going to finish my response to question number 2. Your blasted form cut me off. The survey class enrolled 75 undergraduates, many of whom signed up because of my reputation for Sturm und Drang, bored by the material, that is, books. They nonetheless enjoy watching me pull at what remains of my hair while I stamp back and forth in paroxysms of incredulity at the front of the room. Not granted a teaching assistant to help with the evaluation of essays, I was forced to require in-class exams rather than allow the students to draft and revise their work in the quiet sanctity of their dorm rooms. In an ideal world, I would outlaw literature exams entirely. I would also eschew the twin barbarities of attendance and participation as grading criteria, necessitated, of course, by workload increase. Ms. Goldberg. 4, are there any other comments you would like to add? Yes, I would like to finish my fucking sentences. I suppose your organization is to be commended for not resorting to the absurd array of little black boxes in which recommenders like me are asked to rate applicants according to A, likelihood of earning a Nobel Prize, B, personal hygiene, C, ability to form coherent sentences not randomly punctuated by like or really or other verbal fluff. But given that your damnable form has cut me off every time I initiate it, thank you. I have trouble with online forms. They give me trouble. January 20, 2010. Aaron Young, Human Resources, Compumetrica Inc., that's Compumetrica spelled with K, 77 Laguna Avenue, Bloomington, Minnesota, 55420. Dear Mr. Young, Ms. Vanessa Cuddigan has asked me to submit a letter of reference to your poorly spelled organization on her behalf. While I have only praise for Ms. Cuddigan, who graduated 2 years ago with a major in English, I had expected her to ask that I recommend her for graduate school. Instead, having completed a stint with Teach for America, she is now apparently desirous of some sort of data entry position with your firm, clearly a soul-squelching enterprise. I have asked her to explain herself, but she is evasive, leading me to wonder if something unfortunate happened during the past 2 years to destroy her ambition. Should you hire Ms. Cuddigan, you will find her thoroughly impressive. She's extremely bright, her insights are fresh, and she has a talent for synthesizing ideas into compelling interpretations of the assigned material. Were she applying to graduate school, as I have repeatedly urged her to do, I would take the time here to describe her thesis, a sterling examination of the concept of secrecy in the work of two contemporary novelists, Louise Erdrich and Jonathan Safran Foer. But she has made her Faustian bargain and pinned her newly constricted hopes on compumetrica, so I will limit myself to recommending her on the basis of her brilliant analytical imagination, her open-mindedness, her impeccable character. You or any other employer will be very fortunate to hire a person such as Ms. Cuddigan, who may one day rise to leadership in your organization, at which point I trust it will adopt a more reasonable spelling. In the meantime, I hope you will not consign her to a windowless environment populated entirely by unsocialized clones who long ago abandoned the reading and discussion of literature in favor of ever more restrictive and meaningless ways in which humans are intended to make themselves known to one another. Keeping the torch aloft for now, Jay Fitker, Professor of Creative Writing and author, i.e. books. I'll read 2 more of these. Let's see. March 16, 2010, Theodore Boat, Chair, English. The letters are falling off the wall steadily, off the Department of English mastheads. Dear Ted, obediently complying with your latest summons for superfluous information, I am, yes, thoroughly willing to recommend Ms. Arabella McCoy for the position of teaching assistant mentor, her duties to begin midsummer, a period of time during which one can only hope the poisonous vapors seeping through the vents here in Willard Hall will have dispersed, and the economists, scepters agleam, will be reinstalled in their throne rooms over our heads, emerald chalices raised in a grand huzzah for the coronation. You understand, of course, that Ms. McCoy is a stranger to me. I may have glimpsed her in the hall, the poor burdened wight, as she trudged from one lecture to another in her yard sale clothes, thick piles of yet-to-be-graded undergraduate essays under a raw-boned arm. But mainly, as required, I have skimmed her CV and her letter of interest, both of which express the requisite theater of the absurd language about pedagogy and the euphoria of learning. Suffering creature, yes, yes, I endorse her bid for the mentorship. May the bump in salary allow her to avoid scurvy by adding fruit to her diet once a week. While we're on the important topic of health, there must be something you can do, Ted, about the thick coils of tubing that, as of yesterday, emerged from a sizable hole in the wall outside my office. Resembling the heads of a modern-day hydra, these tubes periodically cough up flocculent curds of unidentifiable gray material, as if issuing a warning to those of us who remain in Willard Hall. Sometimes in my daydreams, Ted, I envision our building in a cutaway view, as if it were a painting by Hieronymus Bosch, the economists placidly robed in the uppermost quadrant, nearest to God, and beneath them, on the lower floors, close to the churning wrath of the boiler, the condemned in a blood-stained, pulsing version of hell. I am sure Ms. McCoy will be an apt and responsible mentor, extracting pleasure from the task, as always, yours, Jay. Let's see, this is the last one from this book that I'll read. April 23, 2010. Letitia Alastair, Flanders Nut House, 771 Glass Lake Road, Glass Lake, Wisconsin, 54153. Dear Ms. Alastair, this letter recommends to you my student, Oliver Postiglione, who informs me that he has applied for a summer job at Flanders Nut House, at the south end of Glass Lake. In a strange coincidence, I spent one summer during my teenage years, but indelibly impressed upon me, in the timeless village of Glass Lake. And as if I were at this very moment standing on the cracked sidewalk in front of it, I can envision the screen door of the nut house slapping shut in the breeze and recall the smell of my favorite purchase, the roasted almonds, wrapped, still warm and lightly salted, in a paper cone. I hope, for the sake of Mr. Postiglione's dignity, Your establishment no longer requires its most junior employee to dress as a human cashew. You will want to ascertain that Mr. Posiglione is trustworthy, hardworking, and of pleasant affect. He is all three. A member of my junior-senior creative writing workshop, he is currently writing a one-act play about a serial killer/scientist who saves humankind from a world-ending virus by discovering a method of harvesting corpses to create a vaccine. The concept is gruesome and not terribly original, but Mr. Postiglione's workmanlike approach to its completion is to be admired. I hope the gold lettering continues to grace the facade of the nut house, its broad front window perfectly reflecting the water's stillness. Though I've not returned to Glass Lake for 40 years, one never forgets the places in which one felt pure. As for Mr. Postiglione, he will learn quickly whether waiting on customers behind the pristine white tile counter in the back or assisting with packages. I recommend him to you warmly and without hesitation, in part because writing letters of reference such as this one allows me to re-inhabit, if only fleetingly, the pensive, knock-kneed person I once was, and to advocate for that former version of myself, as well as for Oliver Postiglione. Please do hire him. I wish him episodes of glorious, sun-washed tedium and a loss of innocence he will contemplate for the rest of his life. Commemoratively yours, Jason T. Ficker, Payne. Thanks. I'm going to read just a little bit of this new book, The Shakespeare Requirement, which comes out in August. Maybe for all those very insightful reasons Stephanie mentioned, I couldn't get Ficker out of my head. I normally am totally sick of a book and all of its characters when I'm done with it, but this time I just kept thinking about Ficker, and I knew I didn't want to do another whole novel in the form of letters, but I had to. He ends up chairing his department at the end of Dear Committee Members, and I thought, what would it be like for him to work as chair in this horrifying mess of a department that he works in? So this is just a few pages from the beginning of The Shakespeare Requirement. On the first unrenovated floor of Willard Hall, Jason T. Ficker, recently elected chair of the Department of English, stuffed his copy of the Campus Scribe into the shredder, having discovered that the weekly student paper contained a glowing article about econ. He had recently returned from a visit to the economics department's portion of the building where he had been mistaken by one of the clerical staff for a vagrant or tourist. Another gawker come to admire the hot and cold water fountains and Orwellian flat screens, the espresso bar, and the sunshine filtering gracefully through the skylights and casting itself in subtle patterns on the tile floor. Descending the steps again to English, he left behind a silent, air-conditioned Erewhon and re-entered the grim and steamy underworld that served as heart and soul and pain of the liberal arts. Muttering, Ficker flipped the switch on his shredder. Nothing. His office, the entire administrative suite or English department headquarters, was barbarically hot, and he had just spent 40 minutes duct taping a rusted, squeaking fan in his window and tracking down a series of extension cords. The outlets in his office were sporadically working, which, end to end, now snaked their way to a distant receptacle in the hall. He had propped his window open with a dictionary and several rolls of toilet paper. Due to 2 broken sash cords, the window functioned more or less as a guillotine. Careful not to yank the fan from his window, he crawled under his desk to fiddle with the plug on the shredder. The semester, including his own freshman class on the literature of apocalypse, would begin in 4 days. Sweat cascading down the neck of his shirt, he reminded himself that there were benefits to being head of a department. His new office did not abut the men's room. His teaching duties consisted of 2 classes per year instead of 5, and he had been granted permission to select from a glossy catalog an ergonomic chair that, should the photo turn out to be accurate, would not be crisscrossed with electrical tape that adhered to his pants. Still, these perks were a handful of penny candy sprinkled over a minefield. English, one of the most ungovernable academic units at Payne, had a reputation for discord and dysfunction going back 40 years. Ficker's predecessor, Ted Bodie, recruited during a moment of administrative despair from the sociology department, had abandoned his post after only 9 months, racing out of the office as if his head were on fire. He had bequeathed to Ficker a scrim of dead insects on the desk, a defunct computer, and a file cabinet containing a Sudoku puzzle book, 11 pencil stubs, and a tube of psoriasis cream. I hope you're not trying to use that shredder. The office adjoining Ficker's, 2 small spaces divided by a sheet of unpainted wallboard into which, inexplicably, someone had affixed a plexiglass window, was occupied by his administrative assistant, Francis Ignatieff, aka Fran. What? He said. The shredder rattled noisily to life. Inch by inch, he fed it the scribe. He was on his knees now, smacking the neck of the machine to speed things along. The shredder paused, coughed, set its own dials to reverse, and vomited ribbons of half-digested paper all over the rug. Unfucking believable, Ficker said. I can't hear you, said Fran. A frisbee thwacked against the window. Clutching the edge of his desk, Ficker stood up, shreds of newspaper drifting across his shoes in the sluggish breeze from the fan. What was it about frisbee, he wondered, that undergraduates never tired of or outgrew? Year after year, chipper and shirtless on the quad, they hurled a plastic disc back and forth while the planet hurtled toward its fiery end. Stuffing the mangled remainder of the paper, with its smiling photo of economics chair Roland Gladwell, into the trash, Ficker torqued his shoulders left and right, his vertebrae sounding off like a marimba. He peered through the plexiglass window into Fran's office. Support staff at Payne, he had found, tended toward eccentricity as well as recalcitrance. Frances Ignatieff scored high on both of these counts. She was a short, gnome-like person whose preference for baggy, sleeveless dresses gave her the appearance of a sack of flour with legs. Her shower sandals, Ficker didn't like to dictate office fashion, but there was something draggle-tail, he thought, about rubber footwear, revealed 10 oddly shaped and prehensile toes. Having been on her own in the office for most of the summer, Fran seemed to consider the newly elected Ficker, though he was her boss, an annoying impediment to her work. He tapped at the window between their 2 offices. Fran sighed. New department heads were as helpless as infants. Fran had been at Payne for years and had broken in 4 of them, having been shuffled as if across a battered checkerboard from one hapless department to another, drilling these supposed intellectual giants in their ABCs. She had strenuously resisted the relocation to English. Everyone at Payne had heard the stories. But as a reward for grooming Fiammatu, the wool-gathering leader of studio art, she had been appointed assistant to the university's #1 loudmouth and notorious crank. With the air of a person climbing up out of a manhole, she pushed herself up from her chair and trudged around the divider to Ficker's portion of the office. And there he was, resembling a toddler left alone, standing bewildered in a mess of his own creation and looking to Fran to put things to rights. I told you not to use the shredder, she said. It doesn't work. I don't remember you telling me anything about the shredder. Why is it here in my office if it doesn't work? Why, Fran thought. Why was not the right question. At Payne, the only question that could reasonably be answered was what? What was that in the corner of the chair's office? A broken shredder. Why was it broken? The second question had no response. It was simply broken. Many things were. It had not been fixed. At 44, Fran felt too old to be revealing to yet another budding leader the secret handshakes and koans that served as policy at Payne. She had never intended to work at a university, which everyone knew was full of misfits with badly swelled heads. Her dream, impractical but not yet abandoned, was to become an animal behavior consultant, which most people didn't think was a real job, but of course it was. Fran already possessed much of the requisite experience, having fostered cats, dogs, rabbits, birds, reptiles, and voles, but she lacked the degree. There's nowhere else to put the shredder, she said. What about the trash can? Victor asked. It's not going to fit, and the trash collectors don't accept machinery. How about the hallway? Blocking the hall is a fire hazard. Victor stirred the gray confetti on the floor. Do we own a vacuum? Did they own a vacuum? Fran tugged at the door of the supply closet, marked very clearly with a sign that said supplies, and dragged from within it the gray Electrolux tank that appeared to have been manufactured during World War II. She parked it next to the plastic bucket full of cleaning products that she had already set near the door to Ficker's office, re-explaining, because in her experience, department chairs were slow to absorb information, that custodians were responsible only for the building's bathrooms and public spaces. If Ficker wanted his office cleaned, he could tackle the shredder debris and any other detritus himself. I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Questions or no questions? Oh, yes, questions. Sure, thank you. They were great about it. They wanted to, they immediately said, sequel, we want a sequel. We're going to put up a suggestion box on your door. We all have things we want to put in it. I was very careful not to include, real people. There's so much lore about academic behavior out there that, there's just so much to work with. So I felt pretty safe about steering away from real people. There were a couple of incidents that I made use of. There was one undergrad who asked me once for a letter of recommendation, and I said, but do you remember that you plagiarized in my class and I gave you an F? And he said, I just need a letter. All right, you got it. And actually, he thought, and maybe correctly, that nobody would read the letter anyway. So as long as it was, checked a box of some sort, it didn't really matter. It's deeply cynical, but possibly true. You had a question. That's okay. Maybe it'll come to you. Yes. Oh, that's interesting. We're going back to the psychoanalytic territory. He was a great storyteller. He told totally weird things, terrifying, weird things that you would not normally. Another was he used to tell us about devices that had been designed for torture. Again, this was like a bedtime tale. So you'd be, my mother would say, all right, up to bed. And my father would come up and say, did you hear about this one? There's it was like, I remember there was one, it was some sort of slide and it would slice people into all kinds of pieces as they went down it and all the pieces would go in different baskets. That was another one he told us. But I was kind of enthralled by them too. I mean, you couldn't not pay attention when he was telling you something. They were really weird. So probably so. And some people asked me after Dear Committee's members came out, why did you make the main character a guy? Why did you make it male rather than female? And it never occurred to me to make the character female. Yeah, he does share some of those weird tendencies that my father had. He appears, I probably used him as a fictional source more than anything else I can think of. Oh yeah, totally. Hmm. And he went to Cornell, I think class of 43, something, chemical engineering, something like that. Yeah. Yes, Emerita. Well, the number of English majors nationally is going down. Maybe it's not at Cornell, but it certainly is at Minnesota. And the literature faculty fought us for a while on creating an undergraduate minor in creative writing. And now that we have this minor, it's not a major, but it's undergrad minor concentration, the number of English majors at Minnesota is going up because they want to take creative writing classes. So now the English faculty are not so unhappy with this idea. But I think, creative writing is really popular across the country. I think it gives people a creative outlet as well as maybe a psychic one. And I don't know, it changes. I mean, Minnesota used to be, when I first moved there, the University of Minnesota was open admission to any high school graduate in the state, land grant university. And it's gotten harder to get in, but and so the kids are very bright to come in, but they don't necessarily write well still. That's, I think people are used to texting and doing everything else. And so much of my portrayal of Ficker is that he's on this last cusp of people of the old generation. And I often feel that way. I write by hand. I can barely use the cell phone. I just feel like there's this new world order coming. And, people who are in their 20s need people like me to die off and make room for the robot families that they're going to give birth to. So, I don't really get technology, and it's going to take us over. That's my, grim dystopian little tale. But yes, you remembered your question. I don't think I left much on the cutting room floor. I usually write everything that's too short, and then I have to make it longer, whereas some people write long and have to cut back. But early on, I was determined that there would be a way for Ficker in a letter of recommendation to talk about his sex life, and I did get that in there. It's probably PG-13 at best, but I just thought, who would write? I have heard tales about letters of reference that people have gotten that include all kinds of totally insane stuff. But I don't know if anybody's ever written about their sex life in a letter of reference, and I thought it'd be fun to have that happen. But you do hear, the letter of recommendation is so rigid a form, because any faculty member wants their student to succeed, and you end up saying, even somebody who's a B student, this wonderful individual, wrote this wonderful thing in my class, and so it's sort of, everybody starts at superb and it goes up from there. So what you look for in a letter is often a red flag or something off. That you'll read a letter that says all kinds of nice stuff about the person, and then although she has a very unusual sense of humor, you think, oh God, red flag. What is that? This person is telling me something in coded language, and what are they saying without saying it? So I like the idea of blowing open the form because it's so stiff and not a creative or an interesting form. Yeah. Well, yeah, I was talking to the grad students about writing young adult stuff or middle grade stuff, which I've done, and I started doing it because I realized I don't plot very well. I needed to understand plot and structure, and my kids were little at the time, and I was reading to them, and to me, it seemed that the biggest difference between a book for 12-year-old and an adult is well, number one, there's a child character at the center of a kid book. A kid doesn't want to read about a 50-year-old business person, but also there was a directness of plot and structure and sort of cause and effect. A leads to B leads to C. And since I was having a lot of trouble with plot, I thought I'll teach myself how to do that. I'm going to learn how to make a plot by writing something that a 12-year-old would read. And so because there's a lot of really good books for kids out there. There's terrific literature for younger people. But again, you got to have a kid at the center of it. And I do think, with the exception of some few books, that YA literature and younger stuff is just more directly, concretely structured. Shorter chapters, more cause and effect. Young person at the center of it. But I always start out in your class. I was always writing stories about 12-year-old girls and their weird fathers. That's what I was writing, and it didn't seem like that great a leap to write about 12-year-old girls and their friends, which is what I did in the kid books. It never seemed like a huge leap for me, as it would have seemed an enormous leap for me to try to write poetry or to write a play. That would have been a much bigger leap than writing for kids. One more, and then yes. They're about the same, but students will come into my office and say, they look nervous, when they ask. They'll come in and say, I know you wrote that book, but would you still write me a letter? And I always tell students, you want to ask anyone to write you a letter by saying, would you feel comfortable writing me a letter, rather than, will you write me a letter? Because you want the person to be very comfortable writing you that letter, rather than willing, So, thanks. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.